Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored to introduce you to digital veteran, mathematical artist, entrepreneur, scientist, web activist turned human and children's rights activist, and Hampstead whistleblower, Sabine McNeill. Although Sabine is well known today as being a whistleblower, her story didn't begin that way. Her background is in math and computing, where she studied in Germany at the German Computer Center. After college, she began her ideal career at CERN in Geneva, where she was able to marry her love of language and her interest of math and computing. Eventually, she moved to London to bring to life her innovative ideas, and it would be in London where her interest would shift into being an advocate for human rights. Unbeknownst to Sabine at that time, she would eventually stumble on a prolific satanic ritual abuse case that took place in Hampstead in North London, involving two whistleblower children that would change the trajectory of her life forever. I remember when I first stumbled on the Hamstead case, it was while I was scouring the internet for information about satanic ritual abuse. I came across a few random videos involving two children named Elisa and Gabriel, who were 8 and 9 at the time, who were filmed talking to adults in casual and forensic settings, where in graphic detail they disclosed horrific abuses perpetuated on them at the Hampstead Christ Church primary school and the surrounding areas by their father, Ricky Dearman, and the satanic cult he led. These hours of testimony were so horrific, I remember sobbing, listening to the casual nature of which these small children were talking about such horrific things as satanic rituals, sexual abuse, child murder and sacrifice, and cannibalism. It was the first time I had heard a child disclosure, and it left my heart in pieces. Still to this day, I cannot watch those videos and audio footage without crying my eyes out. These children still to this day remain with their father after corrupt family court took custody away from their loving mother, who tried to do the right thing, as you've seen happen many times on this podcast. The Hamstead case eerily parallels allegations former podcast guest Samantha Baldwin made against her ex-husband after her children began discussing heinous abuse and before they were ripped from her care by the same failed family court child racket system. I remember also stumbling on footage and video of a woman who began whistleblowing the Hamstead case, a brave and incredible woman who was brilliant, accomplished, and had nothing to gain from stepping up to be a voice for these children. I remember reading how this woman was incarcerated for 4 of the 9 years she was sentenced to for speaking up about this case, and it immediately validated these children's stories even more, seeing how the fake news media was and still is actively covering the story up, and how they created a smear campaign against this brave whistleblower who showed up with such passion and emotion to publicly stand up for children who weren't even hers. This woman was Sabine, who is on the podcast today, and it's an absolute honor to get to finally have her on, as she's been someone who's been an incredible inspiration for me on my journey. I remember watching a video of her in court where she so powerfully advocated on behalf of these children, and it still to this day gives me chills to consider the bravery this woman has to have risked her career, her life, her time, and her reputation for these children, all to do the right thing by standing up for kids who had their voices taken away from them. Sabine is a hero because she could have easily chosen to look away like many do and most have. She has suffered incredible losses and damages, including loss of her time and even her reputation, all because she stood up to do what was right. She is here today to be a voice for these children and to speak about how the counter-narrative established by the mainstream media called the Hampstead hoax has once again ramped up their efforts to paint Sabine and these children as frauds and fakes. I always say that it takes a village to raise a child, and it's going to take the whole world to save a child. Sabine has been building that village, and now it's time for the world to step up. I ask that you guys please give Sabine your full attention so you can learn how to help, as well as learn recent developments in this prolific case many of you have probably also been researching as long as I have. Before I finish introducing today's guest, I wanted to give just a couple reminders and updates. If you'd like to be on the podcast as a guest or share any information privately with me, please email me at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com. You can also use this email if you'd like to be a part of my new book series featuring written survivor testimonies. And you can find that video with all the details on how to submit your testimony on any of my podcast channels. And lastly, I'd love your support on Substack, where I'm taking up investigative journalism as an outlet for me to share about the podcast, guests, and my advocacy work. And you can subscribe to me there at www.emmacatherine.com. Thank you all for caring so deeply about survivors and for helping to make this the safest space on the internet for survivor and whistleblower disclosures. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, Hampstead Whistleblower, voice for the voiceless, anti-child abuse and human rights activist, hero, and one of the bravest women I've had the honor of meeting, Sabine McNeill. Sabine, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you, Emma. Your introduction has moved me to tears.
Oh, you deserve every word.
Thank you. The daughter was Alisa. She was 9.
That's right. Yes, you're right. Thank
She
you
was
for
9
that.
at the time, and her brother was 8. And they were entirely and completely credible. There is just no doubt about it. So the issue is entirely about whether you do or don't believe the children. If anybody watches any of those videos and can't believe the children, then I can only imagine that they must have been abused themselves and their inner child has been totally killed. But I was contacted by the mother 2 months after the children had been taken away from her. And I worked with her very, very closely until I put that petition together, which asked the then Home Secretary to return the whistleblower kids to their Russian family. And I had 16,000 signatures in a very short time, but the petition was pulled without me being told. Later, eventually I found out they told their own help facility, but their help facility didn't tell me. So it was digitally convoluted.
This case has been a case that has affected the whole world. You know, I live in America and I still see these videos, even clips of them floating around. And you've really been such a big part of their voices being heard.
Well, it is interesting. I've just recently also been sent a clip. Please watch at 21 minutes, 20 seconds. and there were the faces. And one of my dear friends and supporters, a Dutch composer of music who actually first had written some music dedicated to the mother and then one to me. And he continues to be completely passionate about the subject, very spiritual, of course. He sent me also lots of books, and he was one of the many supporters I fortunately had while I ended up in prison, which of course was really an absolutely terrible shock. I had not anticipated that.
Yeah, how
But I
could you?
survived.
Yeah, you've survived a lot. You have risked a lot and survived a lot. And I want to thank you on behalf of all of the work that you've done to bring awareness to these two children. You know, their case, it's really important that people know this case. And, you know, without you and the mother coming forth, you know, this would be buried even more and nobody would know about it.
Ah, but wait a minute. This is not just about these two children. The
Oh,
mother, after all, they say very clearly they do it to lots of, I mean, everybody does it. Everybody does it. So it's the whole school. And 8 schools were mentioned. I mean, the mother had a document. She gave me all of her documents, 5 or 8 or so lever arch files about all of the court cases that had gone on between her and the father beforehand. I was acting as an advocate, and she had found me because a solicitor, 2 solicitors whom she had engaged before had not worked in her interest, which doesn't surprise you, which you're very familiar with. And so she found us as, if you like, amateurs, as an association of Mackenzie friends. And I was completely and blissfully unaware of satanic ritual abuse, or SRA, but I had colleagues who were quite familiar, particularly in Scotland. And so that was quite helpful.
wow. So I want to talk a little bit about you and some of your background because you have a pretty interesting story of what you were doing before you were a whistleblower and sort of how you got into human rights. So I'd love for you to share a little bit and expand on what I said in the intro about you and who you are.
Well, once upon a time, my mum read an article in the Best of Reader's Digest, "What is a computer?" And she said, "That's something for you." And so and then my parents, they got me to 3 different computer companies to test my IQ. And yes, I was suitable. And then they found 3 different places where I could learn and study. One couldn't take me because I was a girl, and the other one took me, and the third one was a bit further away. So I went to the one that took me and studied. And as if by chance, some people showed up from CERN, the European Center for Nuclear Research in Geneva in Switzerland, and told me about that place. And it so happened that I went out with a guy who happened to have a sister who worked there. And so they showed up at our place in Darmstadt in West Germany, because the computers at CERN were kaput, were not working, and so that's how I found out about the place, and with some free jobs, and I applied, and I got a job, and I moved to Geneva after I had studied, and I was blissfully happy. It took me 2 years to pick the right language switching between English and French, but as foreign languages. But I loved this multilingual environment. I loved finding mistakes in people's computer programs and solving them. And of course, completely male environment, even though in my office I had 2 female colleagues as well, and 3 male in the course of the 7 years that I was active in the job, until I got bored. I literally got bored, and I was offered a job by the company called Control Data, which doesn't exist anymore. And I was going to take that job, but beforehand I was offered to spend 2 months in America at Lawrence Radiation Lab in Berkeley, California. And one of my friends with whom we went skiing, he was a physicist who was supposed to give a talk at Caltech. And so together we planned the trip. And the biggest thing I did before was to walk down and up the Grand Canyon in the same day.
Oh,
And yeah, and but then a couple of days later, he fell asleep at the steering wheel, and I fell 25 feet, or we fell 25 feet, and I thought, this must be the end, this must be the ocean. But it was a golf course, and I ended up with a dislocated hip. And
oh,
that's how I learned to manage chronic pain. The worst was that I couldn't go skiing anymore, and which I loved. If you've ever been to Geneva, I mean, that is a kind of standard weekend sport. And I mean, tennis and horseback riding, you name it, I did it. And all I could do was swimming and yoga. And I can't remember, there were 2 other things. Anyway, it was very, very hard, very, very hard. to recover from that big, or biggest turning point in my life. Or maybe it wasn't the biggest compared to prison later. But that's, I mean, one of the physicists I knew well had told me about a psychoanalyst, and I went to see her to analyze my dreams. And after the accident, I thought, well, maybe I should. Oh, yes, the doctors said my pain was psychological. And so therefore, I thought I'd see a male analyst, and that might make a difference. And he wanted more than half of my salary. And so I thought, no, I can't be that crazy, you know. So it's then so happened that a former physicist from CERN had started groups in transactional analysis. And that's how I got into the whole field of humanistic and transpersonal psychology, and got so much out of it for myself that I wanted to promote it to the world and learn to organize conferences and events. And with that under my belt, I eventually felt I had outgrown Geneva, and I moved to London.
Wow. What interested you about, because human rights and computer web work is a very different world. What intrigued you specifically about human rights over everything else that you could have done?
Well, in the end, what got me into human rights was my just, if you like, ease with which I organized events. On the way to London, I had this vision of a peace network of people and computers protecting our planet. That was in 1981, well before the internet was born. And it was so exciting, I couldn't sleep all night long. I was in Brussels on the way to the UK, to Wales to be more specific, where there was a meeting about computers used for communication. And that was my particular passion. I was always fascinated about that. And I ended up organizing meetings at the House of Lords with Lord Sudeley, whose ancestry is very impressive. I mean, it could absolutely, there's a Sudeley castle, but his great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather had been bankrupted by Lloyd's. And that was sort of typical for a whole bunch of other people who came to those meetings. They tended to be businessmen who tended to have been bankrupted by banks and or other so-called institutions and authorities. And eventually he said, we have to group cases, or if we want to change the law, we have to group cases. And that's how I began to publish on my various websites. Or I mean, I just love to try and use different software all the time as well, and for different purposes. And so I ended up publishing a website for the Forum for Stable Currencies, and one for the enforcement of the Bank of England Act, because the focus of this forum was particularly the creation of money and the money supply and the control of the money supply. And I even edited a Wikipedia entry about this, but it doesn't exist anymore, which is an interesting sign. But we now know more about censorship than we did know about at the time. In other words, I got into human rights via the victims who told their stories and via my passion of networking. I always like to connect people with people, and I use computers to connect ideas and people. It was very moving when the victims, I encouraged them to tell them their stories, and oh, I had the same insurance company. Oh, I had the same bank. This kind of came up, you know. And I remember one guy in particular, he was in what in London was called, he spoke with a Cockney accent. And he had a Renault garage with 40 employees. And he told us how his parents were asking him, "Son, where are you going? You're suited and booted." "I'm going to the House of Lords, to the Forum for Stable Currencies." And so it made a big difference for people to come to that place, and where the host was familiar with what was done to people, and that didn't matter whether they were of nobility or entrepreneurs. And so this human rights story became my most popular website, which was called Victims Unite. And that's how I then also got to know women whose children were taken and victims of the family court.
And so that sort of became your focus, or rather, what you gravitated towards within the realm of human rights.
It kind of presented itself that way. It wasn't a matter of pick and choose, but that's what just happened, Emma. I was obviously particularly taken by these cases, and the worse they got, the more you get taken. I mean, there was one woman from Lithuania. She asked her little boy whether he had had any food when he was with his father, and he said, "Just the red banana."
Can read between the lines on that one.
Well, I think the interpretation is pretty obvious. Anyway, when the judge, we helped her, or tried to help her, prevent her from being extradited or losing her son, and when the judge read the judgment, I could not take it. It was black was white and white was black. It was so wrong, so terrible, so awful. But so she was one of the ones for whom I built an individual website. I built a website which was called Punishment Without Crime, because there is one very impressive lawyer turned entrepreneur who published and publishes a website called forcedadoption.com. And when I discovered the horrificness of the family courts who operate in secrecy, I asked him, what on earth can one do? And he said, exposure, exposure, exposure. And the web was my platform for exposure.
I think it's amazing how you were able to combine your passions and use your other skills that you learned in web development. You could now bring that to helping campaign for things that you cared about in the humanitarian world.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did. I used my computer skills and my passion, my passion drove me to apply my computer skills, or my love for computer skills. I mean, I just have loved my computers all along. Everybody has joked about it, that I'm married to my computer. And in fact, this to stop the secrecy of the UK family courts was one of the first petitions that I started on a different platform. So I tried all sorts of petition platforms as well to see how they work, and compare and contrast. And I just loved it. And I kept track of all of my websites with the number of views. And that was sort of the way I measured my success. And that was very, very satisfactory to me.
Absolutely, yes. You can combine two things that you really care about. Like, what is better with work? If you're going to get paid for something, why not do something that you enjoy and that serves a purpose?
Well, I wasn't paid. I wasn't paid. I mean, I was paid not for that. That was all voluntary.
Gotcha.
what I was paid for training courses that I gave and that I did, but otherwise, no.
Wow. So this is all from the goodness of your heart too. That's even more special. So talk a little bit about that journey. You start creating websites, you're getting parents connecting with you. Talk about sort of what led up to Ella reaching out to you and why you took such an interest in this case.
Well, one of my clubs, if you like, was the British Computer Society. And I could invite people there and meet people there. And that happens not to have been far away from the Royal Courts of Justice. And the other club where I hung out was the London Technology Network. That was more professional and company-wise. And but that's how I kind of kept up to speed with what was developing. And I often enough met people there. And of course, one of the websites I published was for the Association of Mackenzie Friends. And Ella contacted me because she found the website. Somehow she had learned about Mackenzie Friends and found my website. And I met her and she told me her story. This was 2 months after the children had been taken away from her. And culminated and me or one of us or a few of us accompanying her to her various court cases. An important step was that the judge moved jurisdiction from the local family court to the High Court, which my solicitor told me later we could have or should have challenged, but how do you know? How do you learn? Only by experience, only by being told later, only with hindsight. Anyway, that's what happened. And that with hindsight, it was clear that it was all just part of the cover-up, part of those in the know against those who are naive and innocent, as we were.
Oh my gosh. And the stories, I mean, I don't know, maybe you could share sort of how that relationship grew, but I know I saw the videos first. That was my first introduction, and it was just horrifying.
Yeah, there's no other word for it. But you see, the point is that they were talking, and that's the mother, being Russian, had considered taking the children back to Russia rather than returning to London. But she was concerned about at least the 20 other children that were mentioned. But in fact, I think there were far more children at risk. In fact, in the end, one of my oodles of court cases, and not oodles of court cases, but one of my after my first arrest, my case was appended to another case of another campaigner, and as part of that, I got a court document, which claimed that there was a document with 50 details of 50 parents. I said, what? So I started to count. And because that document was put together by Ella, and it mentioned 175 adults and 72 children, of which there were 20 of these special ones.
And what year was that?
This was in November 2014. I think we can safely assume that it doesn't happen in either the school or that church anymore. But after all, 8 schools were mentioned. And since then, there has been a website that I didn't know about, where I saw recently, it's a British journalist who has been very, very vocal about another terrible case, which is kind of parallel with Hamstead because it's a little boy who also describes in detail what's been, and makes drawings of the genitals of the abusers, you know, and how one then can say that isn't true. That just, I find that too baffling. Anyway, he published on his website that he doesn't think that that church is a Christian church at all. And there's an American woman who was very, very brave and came over and walked around the church shouting the URL of her website, which was hamsteadchristchurch.com, and was taken down. But she had published the name of all of the perpetrators in your face. I mean, it was just incredible. I had never done that. I had only provided a link to a document which said this 12-page document, but I was then blamed for having harassed 4 of these 175 people, named perpetrators. And while I was in prison, the court case was delayed until the law had changed for the maximum sentence to be raised from 5 to 10 years, so that they could give me 9 years. And another prisoner said, you don't even get that for manslaughter. But I presume you are familiar with the website pedoempire.org. Joachim Hagopian, the author, wrote a magnificent 1-page summary of the SRA story. I mean, after 4.5 years of studying SRA and publishing 5 books about it, he manages to condense it into 1 page. And he writes at the bottom the conclusion that I have been wrongly imprisoned, and he chronicled the case in detail. It's chapter 31, very amazing. And a friend of mine had sent me the printout to prison at the time, and I was really impressed how carefully he had described it all. Wow. And he clearly said it was all done to put other people off, you know, to intimidate.
Which is playbook tactics. That's what they love to do to whistleblowers and anybody that speaks out. For people that are new to this case, Sabine, you don't have to go into any type of graphic details, but can you give sort of an overview of this family and sort of the landscape of Hamstead and kind of this cult? And even a little background maybe on the father, because he's pretty well known too, from what I understand. So if you could give maybe just an overview of, I guess, the cult and kind of the network, and you can share whatever you want if you want to share details, but just for people to understand the story better who are new to it.
Emma, I don't know more than what the children said, except that they referred to places which were just around the corner from where I lived. So once again, I had absolutely no reason not to believe them. I never went to that church because I ended up going into exile after my friend had read an email in which the authorities had proposed prosecution. So they wanted to prosecute me, and I just left the country. I mean, because she suggested it to me, I didn't think about it. And like 6 months later, I came back because a lawyer had come forward to protect and defend me. I had spoken to him, but I recommended her to Ella, the mother, him. And Ella at first said, I'm in no hurry to instruct anybody, but eventually she did, and he put in an appeal. He was absolutely passionate about the whole case as well. And at that appeal, I was arrested for the first time in court. And that was the first of a total of 8 or so arrests. After that, my solicitor suggested that the police should just ask me to come for an interview. They don't have to come and storm my flat at midnight as they did. They were handcuffing me because they had supposedly intelligence that I'm violent. I mean, you can't make it up. You can't make it up. But I've seen that over and over now because they can. They just see that it just seems to be their drug, the abuse of power. But there's also the madness of crime targets for the police. I mean, can you believe that? I mean, what for? They have to create crimes so that they hit and meet their crime targets to get a raise in their salaries. I don't know how it works exactly, but it's all I know. It's madness, and I certainly can assure you that prison is the final stations to justify and legitimize the stealing and taking of children.
And so let's talk a little bit about your journey speaking up for this case. How did that start with the mother? What did you do to start campaigning for her? And then how did you sort of become part of the face of this case out in public?
Well, I can't remember exactly now which year it was, but I had gone to Brussels to the European Parliament a number of times because it was actually a Latvian woman whose daughter was taken because foreigners seem to be targeted. And she had contact with the Latvian MEP and had talked to her and had suggested that we have to focus on forced adoptions. It was, of course, what Ian Josephs in Monaco had focused on. I mean, that, and I had written a report because the Council of Europe had written about the UK family courts and how bad they qualify in terms of forced adoptions. In other words, 96% of all adoptions in the UK are forced against the will of the parents. And so I submitted a petition, as by then was used to doing. I had online petition to the UK Parliament, because there was an MP, John Hemming, who was quite passionate and campaigning about the family courts. And so he had submitted a petition to the UK government. And so the EU Parliament was then sort of the next stage of petitioning. I just loved using like computer tools, software tools as political tools. And so I got invited to speak in front of the petitions committee at the EU Parliament, not just sort of for forced adoptions the first time, but then there was a Bulgarian mother whom I accompanied. I can't remember all of the detailed times, but on one occasion, that was before Ella had contacted me, I went there with 30 parents who had all hoped to get their children back. And that was when the 6 minutes were recorded, which I call my 6 minutes of passion that you referred to. And I also submitted, after Ella had contacted me, an emergency petition, which included the one of the whistleblower kids. And the assistant of that Latvian MEP said she will never see her children again. Of course, I never said that to Ella. But this woman knew quite a bit because she had published in Russian a website about the UK family courts. And so she knew, she had clearly come across a lot of cases. And the positive thing was that eventually 5 European MEPs came to London to kind of check. But the negative thing was that I was completely shut out of that visit. And the judge who spoke in Brussels about the situation was one who had stolen the son of a couple whom we tried to help to get their children back as well. So you can't make up the sickness of the people who run the show. I handed our documents to the person who had just given a talk in the petitions committee. And he was not the chairman, but he was responsible in the commission, which is the permanent admin building and administration, not the politicians who are elected every 5 years. I had handed him my document and he said he'll come back to me. And of course he never did. So I've published quite a few videos about Brussels situations. And I met a great German campaigner there as well. And I was in touch with her recently here. I mean, this is the sad thing, Emma. It's a global phenomenon, at least in the West. And I mean, how do I pinpoint? It's London, Vatican, Washington. You're familiar with that big scene and big picture. I don't know what else did you want to know?
I think you answered the question. I was more so asking about what you did to campaign for that mother that called you for Ella, and you really did, like, you went above and beyond, advocating for her and for these children in this case.
I wrote court documents for her, and I accompanied to court with her, and I got support for her. And the last one was a position statement, which literally said to the High Court judge who had ordered me to be before her, but since after the case, she went on retirement, early retirement. I said, basically, either you return the children or we go online. And Ella came back with my other friend who was always good at taking notes. That's why she went into court. I was always good at writing the documents. And Ella came out saying the judge has no intention of returning the children. And so I said, okay, so we go online. And that's what I did.
What did that court case look like for Ella? What grounds did they say that they had right to take the children?
Ella? Yeah. Ella wasn't there. Ella wasn't allowed any representation. The court case was a secret family court case investigating criminal matters. I mean, you can't make it up. And the whole, I mean, I was in exile when it came out. I couldn't read it. Oh, it's just like this other judgment. I couldn't take it in. And that's how I felt when I came to prison. I could not make sense. It is so mad making. I could not make sense that a church could have betrayed parents and children and in such a way. I could not make sense that a judge could be so off the chart, if you like, in the Lithuanian case or in this Russian case. I mean, as you can see, it still is beyond and outside my brain capacity.
That's the thing that we're so deceived by in society. We have all these TV shows and movies that portray court as this space where you go to get justice. It's fair. Everybody's on board for doing the right thing. And in the real world, I think a lot of people believe that that's what you should expect going into an actual court, and nothing could be further than the truth.
Well, I'm so glad that you know that at your young age already now. I mean, imagine where you'll be once you reach my age. That's incredible. Because I had to learn the hard way. I mean, of course, you just assume you have healthy and safe and reasonable assumptions. One of the judges said, professionals don't lie. Well, excuse me, nothing is further from the truth. Dreadful, absolutely dreadful what we had to discover. But it just points to the fact that our journey on this planet is not here because we are supposed to achieve justice or anything like that. We are here for spiritual reasons. We are here so that our soul can grow. We are here so that we can find our passion.
Yes.
And the court case in 2015 decided that everybody who's ever looked at these interviews is either evil or something else. I can't remember the words. And that the children were all made it all up, and it was the fault of Ella and her partner. They groomed them, and it was all completely other than what the children said.
So what was her journey? What ended up happening with all of that?
She stayed abroad, but she didn't talk to me anymore, because her partner made her believe that I was MI5, which is a secret service, and that I lost them all of the chances of ever giving the children back via courts. I mean, of course, that as if he had had as much experience with court cases and parents losing their children as if he should know. Ridiculous. Well.
And so you ended up going to prison. Talk about how that ended up transpiring. You talked a little bit about it, but talk about your experience there and sort of, what was the process of them giving you 4 years and, just talk about some of your struggles going through this because they came down on you really hard with every charge that they had against you.
My solicitor called it an overkill. They gathered 21 charges against me, and the jury found 11 of them guilty and 10 not. And I mean, what difference does it make? But the worst were the arrests, Emma, because they came out of the blue. They tended to come at night, and you can't kind of get used to it either. And what comes to mind is how then after a night in a prison cell in a rainy day, I ended up going to my friend yet again as a moan station for solace, and you wonder why. And the last time they took me to prison, well, once I was only taken for 10 days because my friend raised £20,000 bail money. And so I was released after 10 days. That was in December 2017, but then they came again. Oh, then I was put on a leash, an electronic leash, and then they came on a Sunday morning in March and took me away, and I never saw my flat again. And that's when they were waiting until the court case started sometime in November. And the barrister, who, that in the UK there is a two-tier system of solicitors and barristers. Only barristers can speak in court. The solicitors prepare the paperwork. And the barrister said, you don't want to hear this, but there's a law which is going to raise the maximum sentence from 5 to 10 years, maximum sentence for harassment. I was charged with harassing 4 of the 175 named victims. And that is now the story of the fake hoax film of Channel 4. I was so amazed to realize that the narrative of this film is the story of my court case. And the worst thing is that they actually lured an American into an interview, just like me, who had come over also because he believed the children. And he ended up in prison for 9 months. So, it is really the battle between good and evil. And it was very, very significant that you started with Ephesians 6 as your prayer, because that's what had come my way over and over in prison as well. I went to every Bible group I could go to. I really made it my spiritual mission to try to make sense and to maintain my mental health, if you like. And I will never forget, the Catholic priestess said once, when I told her why I was there, the devil is real. And I think I never knew that as well as I do now. I mean, we are now 9 years later, but that's what happened.
Talk a little bit about that smear campaign that's ongoing right now, and then other ways that they have targeted you and tried to destroy your reputation, and just different campaigns that they've put out against you throughout these years, besides going to jail.
Well, the first time, while I was in exile in Berlin, the BBC contacted me, BBC Radio 4, and they never told me the title of the show. And they interviewed me, and I thought, oh, mainstream media is interesting. You know, my naivete. I believe in the goodness of men and people and humans. And the title of the program was The Cult That Never Was. But the lady who interviewed me said, oh, no, we will not misrepresent you.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And the same thing happened with Tortoise Media, a guy called Alexei not Monstrous, but Mostrous, who shortly after I had come out, again under false pretenses, interviewed me. I thought that they were on our side. And it turned out there wasn't, but I just didn't look at it. I just didn't watch it, and I didn't listen either. But while I was in prison, the day my judgment was pronounced, the mainstream press was informed, and my friends to whom I spoke on the phone told me about the terrible articles. And I remember one title was that I'm Britain's worst troll. Now, I mean, you can Google my name and find out for yourself, but I mean, fortunately, there's a Canadian therapist who discovered SRA from her patients. She spent $80,000 on solicitors and still lost her license to practice psychotherapy. She felt, I had met her in person in London, and she felt that we as a society owe me, Sabine, a lot, and offered me participation in therapy trauma groups, 2 of them. And that's what has enabled me to talk about it now much more than I would have been able before. I mean, in fact, the third time when I was lured into an interview was the one when this guy called Tom, who claimed that he was a producer of Story Films TV, when he lured me and groomed me against all of my hesitations and doubts. And in the end, I kind of thanked him for being my therapist, because at least, I don't know whether you can possibly imagine that it is helpful to talk about it. Talk about your suffering, about your pain, about what you've been through, and the difficulties of getting on your feet again in a city where you don't know anybody, except the language. You know, I mean, I knew the city, but I didn't know any person. And anyway, it was extremely difficult. I had really, really, really a hard time. So to talk about Tom was good. And then but he and Emily, the director, came over. And they came over a day early because I had told them, or asked them that we would talk about it under the angle of these Mackenzie friends, the Association of Mackenzie Friends that I mentioned, because a friend of mine was going to come the next day. But they came a day early and left before he arrived. Because at the end of their interview, they revealed that they were there on behalf of the mothers of Hamstead. And then I learned about eventually somebody alerted me to the press release of that Channel 4 published.
And can you talk about that? Because that's the most recent one.
Well, that's the most recent one. Yeah, strangely enough, the the interviewing team claimed that it would be screened in August last year, and that hasn't happened. And then I was told by friends that it would take place in March this year. So I don't know what's going to be real, what's going to be true. All I can be sure is that they've ignored the fact that I withdrew my consent. They claim that I was given sufficient information to provide informed consent. I mean, once again, this lying, but you can Google for the cover page of The Economist in 2012, which is called A Rough Guide to Hell. And British journalism is one of the milestones on the guide to hell. Yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I can't even imagine going through that. Like they're duping you into doing interviews. You're thinking somebody's trying to help you. And meanwhile, so how does that work if they interview you? Are they twisting your words, or how does that typically work on the final product on
I
what?
haven't been, can't tell you because I won't. I mean, there are people who know how they do it, but I don't. And I'm not looking forward. I will never look at it. I mean,
Good for
I
you.
can do, I can use my time in better ways. But they just assured me that they wouldn't show anything of the filming in the flat. Well, it's a big deal. In the afternoon, they filmed me in what I call the dungeon, a hotel room which they had fitted to look like, to operate like a studio. And where I realized at the end that, well, Emily, the director, admitted that she was on the other side. And I just said to Tom, I'm sorry I trusted you.
How terrible. Oh my goodness. When you were going through this, how did you, especially in the beginning, within yourself, how did you deal with the opposition that was happening outside of you? Because, I mean, there wasn't you and Ella sort of brought the story to light, but right away there was a lot of opposition coming after you. How did you deal with that, and how did you find the courage to keep going and not shut down?
I don't know. All I know is that to know what I knew and not act on it was not an option. I acted as best as I could. And of course, if you like, my petition and my blog, after I published the petition, I published also a blog. And in the best interest of the whistleblower kids, question mark. And that was very, very popular. And that was very informational about the case on its own, but also the whole SRA issue, which I then began to study. I went to the British Library and got the one copy of a book called Children for the Devil by a guy called Tim Tate, who was part of a team called the Cook Report, which was a very well-established television report program. And of course, one of the big books was also Blasphemous Rumors, which is a copy which I got sent by a friend, and I gave it to my barrister so that she would believe me. And I just familiarized myself with the subject, and I didn't. I mean, the opposition, if you like, on the trolls, I just blocked them. Anybody who trolled along the comments of my website, I blocked them. And in reality, I mean, I had a stone thrown through the front door. I had my internet cables cut when I won a court case, the first one with my co-defendant. And I had a verbal assault at a bus station. But I mean, you just survive it. What else do you do? I mean, I reported it to the police. What difference did that make? None, of course. So you just keep going. What else is there?
Yeah, you're such a warrior. You are such an example of that, of just anytime anything comes after you, just bulldoze right through it. And I love it. It's one of my favorite things about you.
Well, I mean, you just, you learn. There's only to live one day at a time and to deal with the problem as it comes up. And once I was in prison, there were different problems that came up. I had to deal with. I mean, I'm in touch now with two former inmates, which is very, very healing, because we know what it's like, no, it just sort of feels like, I imagine that's how men who've been in the trenches feel like, it creates a level of bondedness which is totally unique.
Yeah, and you had mentioned that this affected you a lot mentally and emotionally. Can you talk about that journey a little bit too, and how you've been able to heal so much from that?
Well, I had a lot of support. One dear, dear, dear friend was my daily helpline. I ended up calling her virtually every day, and 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 she arranged everything that was needed to be done practically, and sent out emails as well, and I think, but I don't really know what happened outside. But the result is this bag of supports that I got, of cards of support. These were just the pretty cards, and I glued them on the wall of the cell. So and it just was ever so pretty because I glued only one side, so they were all then just like wings. I didn't put them flat on the wall, and it just gave me a complete joy. And I was in 4 different cells in those 4 years. The reason why 9 years were reduced to 4 was because the British system, normally, if you are a UK citizen, you get half, and you remain half on what they call a license. Since I was a German citizen, I opted for the possibility of being deported rather than having to fight for the right to have that option as if I was a UK citizen. So that saved me, in theory, 9 months, in practice 7. So I ended up being released in January 22. I had a team of 5 people accompanying me in the plane, just in case I don't escape. And I think 3 different teams were watching over me during the night at the airport, in case I could be more violent, I guess. It was completely ridiculous and farcical. You can't make it up. But that's how I got back to Germany, which wasn't that much of a home anymore because I had lived in London in the same flat for 40 years. But it had become my second home because we moved my mum after the wall had come down here, and my brother had bought a little house, and so my mum got me to love this area, and this is now one of the 3 towns or 4 towns where I could have chosen to live, and I'm extremely happy here as a kind of congenial environment. I mean, where can you take your bike and go to the doctor or the pharmacy and go shopping on a bike? I mean, unfortunately, I fell off it and broke my foot once, but
Oh, no.
but as a consequence, I got to know 3 most delightful neighbors, whereas before I didn't know anybody, and one of them is a priest, so it's absolutely terrific.
There's a bright side to every negative, if we look hard enough.
You just need to look at it and recognize the positivity. Absolutely.
Yes, exactly. And so how did you end up finding, I guess, a good therapist? There's a lot of, people that come on my podcast that really struggle to find somebody that's open to talking about this. How did you end up navigating that, to end up getting to where you are now, where you found somebody that will listen to you and help you?
Well, Sandra Fecht is Canadian, and so she's very familiar, and she knew me, and so she contacted me. She was in touch with me while I was in prison as well. She supported me there as well, and she's been running these two group. No, she's been running one group for a couple of years as well, and then she offered me therapy, and she said you can either do it individually or with others, and I wanted to invite my two best inmate friends in. So that's how I end up with these two groups. And that's what has been really helpful. And it's sort of the emotionality with which is connected with the whole trauma has definitely subsided or has kind of flattened out or normalized.
That's phenomenal. I know that can be really hard for whether it's a survivor or somebody who is helping. Secondary trauma exists too, and just learning about all of this and feeling so helpless and understanding what's happening and then being persecuted for it. You've been through a lot and it's not even your story, it's not your life or your relatives. These are gifts that you've given the world and time that you've given, to advocate for others. And it's such a shame how you've been treated in the meantime to do it and that you should have to suffer this much as a result of it, and you're just so brave. It's amazing seeing you just get up no matter how many times they try to push you down, you just keep getting up and going, and you're always smiling and trying to find the best in everything despite all this stuff being so heavy.
That's really, really very sweet how you describe it. It takes one to know one, Emma.
This is very true. Yes. I know when I first learned about satanic ritual abuse, I had never heard of it before. And I was researching human trafficking and I stumbled on it and I was like, what is this? And I believed it right away. And I love your answer. I was going to ask because I love your answer too on this. Why did you believe it? And what was your reaction when you first learned about satanic ritual abuse?
Well, first of all, um, I had absolutely no reason not to believe the children. Each on their own and together, they were completely consistent. There was just no wishy-washy. Then I discovered an EU directive that in any accusations of child abuse, children are to be believed before adults, which makes complete sense because adults have vested interests. Children can only speak from their own experience. They can only tell the truth their way. That they can't get numbers right, that they can't estimate numbers, that's forgivable. But who can make drawings of genitals if they didn't experience and see them? How Gabriel described the details. I mean, you just can't make it up. And so there was just no option. I don't have children. I don't have my own children. I just, I don't know, I just felt for them. I felt for Ella, and I am easily sort of in campaigning mode, if you like.
Yes, 100%. And that was your mission at the time too. That's what you were doing for other mothers and family court,
Yes,
So
yes,
of course it fell in line with what you were doing. And I mean, how do you
yeah.
watch those videos and not just crumble, and read about what was happening to these kids or what their allegations are? Like, how is the whole world not up in arms with this? You know what I mean?
That is the strange question, isn't it? I mean, okay, I do not read the judgments I can't read, or only on. I don't know how long it takes or took me to eventually look at that powerful judgment. But if you read something or see something and it doesn't touch you, I can't help it. I mean, you know, everybody has their own level of threshold, their own sensitivity.
Yes, absolutely. You mentioned before we got on the call, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about this, about why this case is sort of a, um, it sort of sets a standard in the world for cases like this.
That's a very smart way of putting it, Emma. I remember survivordavidshurter.com saying that the children confirm what adult survivors have been told. And that to me is the critical thing. There, in June, well, we are February 24. I think it must have been June last year or later in summer that I learned about a very, very remarkable Christian organization in Switzerland. And I approached them after I had learned about this Channel 4 film because they are also concerned of fighting with the media. And they had put out a film called 27 Victims, 27 Perpetrators. And the title is The Blood Cult. And that has had well over 1 million views since. But then they put out a second film. And the first one had, I think it mentions as a victim number 4 or so, it shows Hamstead videos as well, clips. And in the second one, there are 111 victims and 50 perpetrators. And that came out only in October last year. And that has had now 2.4 or 5 million views. And that goes out in 14 different languages. So when this Channel 4 announcement came along, I had this strong feeling that SRA is just not deniable anymore. And that was my stance. That was the kind of strength on which I argued. First of all, I put together a document which turned out to be 22 pages long as the terrible reality of SRA and the happy end of plausible deniability. Because that's what a police officer friend of mine said. That's what they always rely on, plausible deniability. Well, SRA, the existence of SRA can't be denied anymore if you have 2 international films with showing testimonies of 27 and 111 survivors, and a website called 50 Voices, which sort of fills in the 23 of the 27. So, you know, enough is enough. Plus, a remarkable survivor called Jeanette Archer in the UK put together an international conference on SRA in the UK, which concludes also exactly what I said. SRA is not deniable anymore. And to me, it's therefore not anymore the question of whether Hamstead is right or wrong. Hamstead is Hamstead, and it set the standard because of the children as being the most direct, let's say, victims and witnesses at the same time. It's just very different from adult survivors who, after years of therapy, dare to give an account of their memories and come out with a book than these children, who, of course, what I find so absolutely terrible, were just so betrayed over and over again. That's what they have had to deal with. I mean, I shudder to think what they are like by now and how they would recall if anything now. there was another big website which was set to private, which talked about filthy Britain. And in that context, they also said something about the whistleblower kids confirm what filthy Britain is about. So it set a standard, first of all, above all else, because there were two children and because they were at an age of 8 and 9 where they were entirely credible. And anybody with a common sense and a heart also can tell the difference between them telling the truth and them being coaxed into talking about what the police officially call the retraction. I mean, it was so damn obvious that the police coaxed them into retracting their interview. I mean, you just can't make it up. It's just too terrible. Just too terrible.
And one of the things they had said, if I'm not mistaken, and you can obviously correct me, was that the mother was coaching them, correct? To say some of this?
Well, yeah, you see, that's what they said, that it was the mother and her partner who did the abuse. Not when, I mean, I had the police record and I got recommended a police officer whose profession it was to assess the quality of the interviews and the quality of the report. And she both, Ella paid her good money and she came back with very, very clear evaluations that both the interview and the report were below professional standard. And Ella later, with the aid of that solicitor who had come forward, had approached the IPCC, which is a commission which had also found the police investigation flawed. So the responsible authority, i.e. the police, should reinvestigate. But, I mean, who would do that? I mean, it would have to be Ella, but she's abroad. And of course the father, I mean, I don't know after how many months or years the children were taken out of foster care and given to him. But so, by now it's all water under the bridge.
It's just,
And I'm curious what's going to happen to the children. All I know is I think I can confidently say that at least the abuse in the church and in the school stopped. So we've achieved something.
it's so sad. I remember when I watched those videos, I was just so taken aback at how casually and candidly these children were just saying the most horrific things I had ever heard in my life. And they weren't even really emotional about it. It was so normalized for them. Like you could tell that if a child had to talk about that stuff like on the spot, that's like really hard, scary stuff to talk about and to like you can't coach emotions out of kids whether or not you tell them what to say. Like you could tell that these kids, this was so normal for them to experience and talk about it. Like there was no doubt that that was their experience. I felt that same way whenever I watched it. I was like, this has been going on for so long in their lives and so frequently that they can just, it's so normal for them. They don't get emotional talking about it. They don't look at it like it's necessarily wrong. They're not liking it, but it's just so normal and candid the way that they were talking about it.
Well, I don't know how long it took the mother and her partner while they were on holiday to get it out of them, and how much emotionality was then spent on that occasion, because they were threatened by their father, of course, not to convey anything, and they knew about killing, so therefore you've seen the video, so I don't tell you anything that I haven't seen, that they haven't said. It's just.
It's so sad. I've seen that a couple other times with these family court cases where mothers will have, a forensic interview or something, and you just see these children just saying these things, just it's my everyday life kind of, and it's like, oh my gosh, like how are we not enraged by all this? This is so terrifying that there's kids that like for one have to talk about this, but for two, like it's just so casual for them. in a sense.
It's just, I guess it's matter of fact.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
But you have spoken with other survivors. What what is the bottom line for you? Um, where do you where do you paint the landscape at this point? What
As
do
far
you
as the family court stuff,
well, yeah, I mean, the family court stuff is the beginning, isn't it? That's the first station. I mean, that's how it started for me. The family courts, and then began so that they are secret so that they can remove the children. Then I discover they are secret because they want to do forced adoptions. Then I discover that maybe these 20 special children were forcibly adopted to be abused on a regular basis. And then I discovered this happens to me in cults. And then I discovered adrenochrome. I mean, how horrible can it get? And
I
then I discover harvesting organs. I mean, it's a bit much.
it's a lot. And then you try to go somewhere or you think, "Oh my gosh, I need to go get help," or somebody needs to go to the authorities. And then you realize all the authorities are in cahoots and they're all working together to cover this up. So it's
Yeah,
like, what do we do?
yeah.
Like you can't go to court and talk about it. You can't go to the police and talk about it. It's like this horrific thing that exists that just gets brushed under the rug and mocked in like horror movies and in all these different ways to make society think that it's fake. And then on top of that, you have, organizations like the Satanic Temple going out and advocating against therapists that are trying to help and against different whistleblowers talking about SRA, so like you literally have Satan like coming after it and like they're allowed to. And it's like, what kind of twisted world do we live in?
Well, you are so sharp and so aware of it all. Have you come across survivors who've had difficulty leaving the cult that they were in?
I would say the majority of them had a very hard time. Maybe the decision wasn't hard, but whether the decision was hard or not, as soon as they left, I mean, just bombarded with, gang stalking and terrorizing and just awful, awful things, vandalizing and blackmailing. I mean, you name it, threats. It is death, assassination attempts. It's like, man, like they invest so much into people staying into these cults that they will do anything to keep people in it and to keep the secrets in.
And to what degree do you think it's intergenerational families?
I think a lot of what we're seeing as far as these connections are intergenerational families. I know not everybody is, but it seems like a lot of these cults operate in the multi-generational and then also from the government sponsored child trafficking and behavior modification with MK Ultra. They look for children that have the generational, because from what I understand, after 3 generations a child is more prone to, after 3 generations of abuse, a child's more prone to dissociation. They're more prone to obedience and compliance, to mind control. They're perfect candidates to keep abusing, and to then teach how to abuse. So it does seem like,
Wow.
as far as the cults and, these government sponsored programs, the intergenerational is very important in the bloodlines. But I have heard of outliers where, a normal family was in their neighborhood or just existing, and a school teacher, took the kid and was abusing them for these programs, doing satanic ritual abuse or mind control, or some other person in the community, was abusing the child. So I do hear of that, but the majority, there's some type of intergenerational for a lot of these cases that I'm hearing.
Sad, 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 bizarre, bizarre, bizarre. But then I suppose one can only look at it at the big picture, like David Sorensen with Stop the World Control, Stop World Control, not the, and Benjamin Fulford in Tokyo. I mean, we're talking about at least a 20, if not 26,000 cycle of cult and Khazarian mafia, and funnily enough, using and abusing the money system that I started to investigate first. But who would have not thought that that would lead me to investigating SRA? My goodness. But I must tell you that the proof of the fact that all of my experiences were of a spiritual nature and designed to be and to happen is that I found the pattern of prime numbers that is not supposed to exist while I was in prison.
Can you talk about that?
Well, I didn't have access to a computer, did I? Or only occasionally, eventually. I mean, it was completely bizarre. I must just, as a little episode, I must tell you that the only way that I could have used the computer was by going to the library. And I wanted to have it. I wrote a poem, and I wanted to type it up and send it to some prison paper. And I was not allowed to touch the computer. And another prisoner was allowed to type it for me, but I was supposed to sit at the other end of the room of the library at that point. Literally. This is how bizarre prison stuff was. But I mean, prison episodes is another conversation, right?
Oh.
So I was forced to think up what I was doing with myself. And I can't remember why and how I started to look at my numbers again. I mean, the truth is that in the late 90s, I started to think mathematics, or to revisit mathematics, which I had turned into a prototype software, which was very impressive and which is still valid today. And but I mean, prime numbers are sort of like a puzzle, if you like. I mean, it's something that lots of people try to understand. And I had just a particular kind of idea of how to organize them. And I ended up finding the pattern, and particularly that the pattern was always stronger, that it kind of predicted what the next thing, what the next number would be. So I ended up writing an article even, and a friend or friends sent it. Oh yeah, my nephew always sent me the right books, and there was one where 50 professors were mentioned, and it was a collection. It was a special on Quantum magazine and a special edition on prime numbers. I only got one answer back, and they said, this is already understood. Well, I developed a concept that I call digital numbers. And digital in Latin meant the finger, but in German there is the difference between digit and number, also sort of more explicitly. But in any case, Pythagoras used to say everything is number. I say everything is digital now, and digital meaning is anything between 0 and 9 as building blocks for decimal numbers. And so I got more and more into the quality of the digits. I mean, there is a lot about sacred geometry that people can relate to, because it sort of goes into that direction. But with my computer background and thinking as logically as a computer, I came up with a whole new body of knowledge. Cannot but call it that. And my website that I'm working on is called Digital Number Patterns, because I found patterns, and through patterns, that and how I've effectively designed concepts that need to be translated into software, and then we can model reality better than science can do now. Einstein noticed that where the laws of mathematics are proven, they don't relate to reality. And where they are relating to reality, they have uncertainties attached to them. They are not certain. I'm closing the gap. I've created digital integer mathematics, which deliver certainty and do away with the uncertainties that are currently around. So I'm going to demystify not just the complex number plane and roots and infinity, but even the magic number pi.
Really? Oh my gosh. I think this is really fascinating. I've never been good at math. It seems like it should be just the easiest topic because the answer is always the same no matter what. But I've always liked really creative topics. But I'm always so amazed at people who understand math in such a deep way because it's so important. Everything is math for the most part. And like you said, there's the sacred geometry of it. There's so many different ways that numbers impact our life. And we're so unaware of it. And I feel like knowing math, you almost get like a glimpse into the world that we live in if you can sort of put it all together and dissect it.
Wow, that's terrific. The kind of grasp that you have is like an intuitive feeling for it. And it's so strange that people always say, let's do the maths. It's not maths they're talking about, they're just calculations. And maths is truly much deeper, but numbers are universal symbols. And the digits are, I call that 1, 2, and 3 are actually, I call them cosmic digits. And how each of the digits have a particular function, which is geometrical as well as arithmetic. So it is everything which is geometric is visual, but it's measuring the earth. So it has to do with measuring. And then I introduced symmetry, but symmetry is understood differently in mathematics than it is in physics. There's a very interesting book by a woman called Margaret Wertheim. She's Australian and published it in the late 90s. It's called Pythagoras' Trousers, and it's about God, physics, and the gender wars. And it's about the fact that physicists sort of have kind of acquired the throne of science, and they are the gods of science, when really in ancient Greece, the mathematicians were the ones, because that's about concepts and ideas, whereas physicists don't do much more than just measure and compare. And there was a German philosopher who said so. They don't explain anything, they just measure. And I found that very interesting. And there was a computer scientist, Joseph Weizenbaum, who wrote the first program called Eliza, where people talked to Eliza as if she was a therapist, even though it was a computer program. And he says that every instrument embodies the laws. Well, so the measuring instruments that physicists use to measure anything cannot go above and beyond the laws that mathematics have developed so far. So what I've come up with are now concepts for software to measure on screen. And that's what I'm going to go for now this year. I mean, I had a great meeting about that on Tuesday this past week, and I'm full of beans to go forward with it.
Good for you. I love how you light up whenever you talk about this stuff. You can tell that it's something that you're really passionate about, and I think that's so wonderful that you've maintained that your whole life. You liked that since you were young, you were introduced to it, and you've really just had this narrow path where you were like, nothing's going to come between me and, what I love doing. And I think that's amazing. A lot of people don't have the courage to do that. They find time to do what they love in their spare time instead of figuring out sort of how to make it a part of your life. And I think that's so wonderful that you're still exploring all of this, and creating from it. And I'd love to hear, on this end, what you have a book coming up that you said that you're in development. What else are you working on? And then where does the Hamstead case stand now too? And what are your goals for that? And what are you working on with that case too?
I couldn't ignore it less, I mean, I basically, if that Channel 4 thing hadn't come my way, I wouldn't have bothered at all. And it was the interview was terribly traumatic, but recently I became the victim of Trojan spyware, and that was at least as traumatic, if not more. I still haven't sorted everything out. So and some intuitive friends said it's the CIA or the MI6, the British version of it, that are responsible for it. So if they think I need to be hounded digitally now, let them do it. I mean, I know who is going to be the judge of my character, and I know what happens when I die, and that's the only thing that's worth thinking about. And until then, I will just do my best, and I will keep following my bliss. I mean, that's what I learned. Follow your bliss, follow your heart, follow your inner guidance. And the Hamstead case, yes, as and when somebody wants me to talk about it, I've done as much as I could, Emma. I'm in my naivete. I've started the first petition with change.org, and I had 2,000 signatures in a pretty short time. And change.org deleted it. So I said, I'll try and see what happens with Avaz. And remember, I haven't published a petition for 10 years. So I tried Avaz. Well, they took it down too with some flimsy excuse, not giving me a proper reason, not treating me as an adult, if you like, who can read and write and defend herself. And then Podia, the platform that I'm using also for my number work now, also took down the site that I had built, and with another similar kind of flimsy reason, some policy. So I never know who it is. Change.org said they got a legal order. Well, if it's a legal order, why can't I see a legal order? I mean, at the time, so I tweeted to Elon Musk, all I want for Christmas is a petition platform for free speech.
It is so wild that we live in a time where you can't even have a website that's not monitored, or that, they're looking for every single way that somebody's trying to speak out. And even, like you said, doing nefarious things to people's software and taking down websites that other people created and are paying for. It's really terrible, and it's so hard, and I completely agree with you. We need a platform. We need somebody to create something that isn't censoring every little thing that's out there. And actually, Twitter has been somewhere where more recently I've seen more clips and videos of the Hamstead case being shared around from the video recordings. I'm seeing people on that platform more than other platforms. I think a lot of other platforms are also taking down that material, social media, Instagram and, platforms like that. And I'm seeing these clips come up on Twitter, which is kind of neat. So it does make me think that in some ways they're allowing more stuff to be seen. But I mean, I know people on that platform too that are still getting deplatformed and taken off. So it's so hard. But I mean, it's really scary times that we live in, that even a website that we invest in can be ripped from us and shut down with no good reason at all, and that we're targeted in so many ways if we try to tell the truth.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you observed that on what you observed on Twitter as well, because coincidentally, Red Pill Drifter started to publish the police interviews, not the short private ones, in December last year. And I can't remember how I stumbled into them, but I then also happened to stumble into a Twitter space, and I have not spent much time on any social media, honestly. My challenge is and has been to make sense out of all of the material that I produced and to present it in as clear a way and succinct a way as possible. And that's a big, big, big and difficult challenge I've given myself. But on Twitter, I listened to somebody who was actually Twitter staff and and Elon joined them, and they had just decided, and I think it was in 22, to clean up Twitter, and especially with respect to child abuse. And that's why I had hope as well. So I haven't come across anybody. Well, Christine was deplatformed, but she thinks this was because she said something bad about Elon. Otherwise, I don't know of people having been deplatformed when they were speaking. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Elon had said Pizzagate is real. And on some level, Hamstead compares to Pizzagate in my head. Does it in yours?
Yes, just this big network and this, small scandal. Like Pizzagate wasn't small, but what was presented to the public was small. But whenever you dig into it, it's just this huge story. And I feel like the Hamstead case is the same thing. They gave the public like these little pieces, like, oh, there's these little kids, and then there's this whistleblower, and then there's all this fraud behind it, the Hamstead hoax, but it's like you said, if people go and actually watch the videos, if they actually go and research it, like there's no denying it. And it's very much so like Pizzagate in that way, where it just, the more you look into it, the bigger, the story gets, and you realize that this network is huge.
You see, it just reminds me, it's like the police claim there were 50 parents' details because they didn't bother to count it. When I counted, there were 175. I mean, it's true. The belittling is part of the method of suppressing it all.
100%. And I love too that you mentioned Red Pill Drifter. I want to give him a shout out. He's been sharing some of my podcasts too. And, with his platform, he's been bringing tons of advocacy to survivors, to whistleblowers, to parents, and has just been like so brave putting out this material when so many people that have big followings won't do it. They're like, I'll put out something sort of small. I'll put out something about human trafficking, like a little scandal, but I'm not going to touch satanic ritual abuse. I'm not going to say those words, and I love that he's just out there like putting out these videos and bringing awareness to it and like really using his platform for good. And I'm so happy that he was supporting you too.
Thank you. Well, it was just a chance that I found those videos, but then I could also say to myself, there is nothing, there is no coincidence. It just was all meant to be, and we'll see. I mean, everybody knows the truth will win, and the tide is changing, and the cabal is hanging on, as with the edge at the edge of their teeth, or whatever the saying is. They are on the losing end. There's no doubt about it.
I completely agree. Yep. And they know it. And that's why they're working extra hard to shut people like you up, Sabine, because they know that they're being threatened in every way and that people are waking up to this and that more and more people are coming forth and sharing.
You see, this is why I'm wondering, why on earth do they think it's worth putting out this film? Or maybe it's all just bluff and they just want to pretend it'll come out and it will never, and in reality, it actually never will.
It seems like in their mind, they think that they can just keep repeating the same things, just like the satanic panic, right? When whistleblowers started coming forth and saying, hey, I went through satanic ritual abuse, all of a sudden it was like, oh, satanic panic propaganda, this is a lie and we need to cover it up, and it seems like they mock it almost by putting out these like videos like what they're doing to you and these people that are like, oh, that's fake, and I think to them they think that it's like their last straw. Like, what else are they going to do? They have to do something because otherwise you're going to be the one out there reaching everybody. They have to find some way to get their message across that it's all fake and it's a hoax, so it's almost comical when you're on this side of it, but it's really sad that so many people just watch the news and they don't look any further. They see something and then their mind is made up. They don't go say, oh, I heard of this case, I'm going to go look into it. Like, is this true? And the news still has such an influence on people's opinions on things, but I do know them going out there and talking about it, there's so many more people awake now that if they do put out this interview, there's more people now that are going to say, wait a minute, I'm going to go look this up and see if it's correct. Like, more and more people are asking questions than ever before. So it's not everybody, but I think it'll work in your favor if they put something out because there's going to be people that hear it and say, wait a minute, is this true? I'm going to go check. And you're going to bring more people onto our side that way.
That's what a friend of mine said. Let them find out the hard way that there are more people awake now than 9 years ago.
Exactly. So many people now are like, oh, the TV's fake. Like, people know that now. It's not it's not something that only a couple people know. Like a lot of people think the TV's fake, you know?
Yeah, the mainstream media have become fake, huh? And I told you about British journalism on the road to hell. I mean, it's so the tabloids, as they are called in the UK as well, they are definitely on their way out. Radio, well, I don't know. I can only speculate, and I don't like speculating, but I was just sort of curious, at least, to think why? Why? I mean, they can't. Never mind. It's
I, I know we can't put our mind in the head of a psychopath.
no.
It's too hard.
Yes, yes, yes. What? It's just not worth doing, really.
Right, 100%. And speaking of, I don't want to say they're all psychopaths, but I know some of them are. Were you personally attacked at all by the Satanic Temple or any members of it? I know a survivor. I don't want to mention her just in case she doesn't want people to know this, but there's another survivor that has been advocating for the Hamstead case that said she's been personally attacked by Lucian Greaves and some of the Satanic Temple members. I wanted to ask you about that too.
No, I did not have that privileged treatment. No, I only this the as close as I came to my to the opposite side where this one guy at the bus stop and the did you ever see the website called Hoaxstead Research?
I think I did. Yes. Yes. I haven't looked at it recently. Like that wasn't something that I'm familiar up to date with now, but when I first heard of this case, yes.
Well, they really, really stalked me and published photos of all of us 40 supporters at some stage. I mean, let's say prime supporters. Us 40, I mean, it just happened to be 40, and we were not all in the same club as such at all, but just people who had all come forward, each on their own. But Hoaxstead were really, really mean until I discovered also who's behind that. And it's so the plot thickens, the rabbit hole gets deeper and deeper, and the network thickens as well. That's what my conclusion is about it all.
Exactly. Yes, and it's such a big network and they come from all different, sectors and it's hard to sometimes look at like, well, how is this connected to this? Like, what do you have anything to do with this? And then whenever you dig into
Yes,
that person, you're like, oh, because you're connected to this person who's connected to that person. I see.
that's what Hampstead Research was such a brilliant site that they did this what they called online tunneling, and they found big, big, big connections amongst these perpetrators. Yes, yes, amazing. I mean, one of the best discoveries they made was that one particular person was looking for tattoo removal. You see, the most obvious, talking about petitions, there was one woman put up a petition, and which is still out there with 2,000 signatures, but change.org sort of automatically closes it at that point, and she doesn't bother to update it, which is we ask that the perpetrators come forward with distinguishing marks and get them examined by trusted police and doctors. I mean, it's the obvious thing. So if they're all innocent, why don't they show what they've got?
Yes, exactly. Yes, I know. And why don't the public or the court question and dig into and analyze the abusive side of where the allegations are being thrown at instead of it's like always they go after the whistleblowers and the innocent parent. They analyze them and find anything that they can to pretend that this person is crazy or whatever it is, and they don't put that same effort into the person that's being or the person or people who are being accused of abuse. And it's like, what in the world is this? This is so backwards.
But this is why The Devil is Real is a minor version of everything that we are living in seems to be satanic. It's because everything is inside out and upside down, contrary to what God created us for and how we are supposed to live. You know, Ephesians 6 wouldn't have been necessary if we all were living like God's creatures, but we don't. Satan has abused us and our minds too much, too badly. And so we as a species have created systems that are untenable and that need to collapse, and they will.
They will, and we'll create ways around it. We're not going
Yeah,
to fix that old system. It's just not going to work. We have to figure out ways aside from that to build the world that we want and to create the world that we want without them. There's not many of them, like you said. There's so few of them, but they rule everybody because they've slithered their way into all these positions of authority, and it's like we don't need them. We can create our own world on the side of what they're doing, and unfortunately so many people are still intertwined, like Ella, like she's still intertwined with that system, sadly, and trying to get her children back, but there's things that we can do, just like what you've done, going out and speaking, doing podcasts, and doing advocacy work. Like there's always stuff that we can do to combat that. It's just, a lot of people aren't. I think people get intimidated because they're like, well, I'm just one person. What am I going to do? And it's like, well, look at you, Sabine. You're one person, and you spread the story all over the world somehow. I'm just one person, but I started a podcast, and even though it's a small podcast, like I still did something. There's always something that we can do, and you're such a beautiful example of that, of not ever taking an excuse for anything and just saying, enough is enough. I don't stand by this, so I'm not going to stand by it. I'm going to stand against it, and I'm going to actively stand against it because it's wrong. I'm not going to look away.
yeah, as I can only repeat, it takes one to know one, Emma. Well done, well said. It's a strange, strange world that we live in, and we can only turn it around by doing our best. When I worked with the Forum for Stable Currencies, I published that a criminal system creates crimes and criminals. And now I have to say a satanic system creates satanic minds, satanic institutions. I mean, look, how could COVID happen if it didn't have this satanic background behind and around it at its root cause and core?
Yes, that is a great example of that, in a way that it affected not just one country or one city, but that was like a global, satanic ritual in a sense that they threw upon humanity.
Yes, it was, exactly. Yeah, and there was the first document that came out by the International Commission that investigated it. On page 80, they referred to SRA. I was very pleased about that they had woken up to that element. And it's quite clear that SRA has become more of a, let's say, a talking point. What is not so clear, I mean, I was even surprised to hear Alex Jones not being capable of distinguishing between the Khazarian fake Jews and other Jews and Israelites and Zionists, and sort of covering it all by anti-Semitism, and that is far too easy. But that's another conversation, I suppose.
Yes, you're right. What have you seen in your years of advocacy work? What have you seen from the beginning as far as people being open to it? Did you meet more resistance then than you do now when you talk about this? Or how has the conversation around satanic ritual abuse evolved?
I must admit that I have actually not talked about it that much because I didn't have the opportunity. I was behind walls without access to the internet. I did have eventually for 4 years I was inside. During 18 months I had access to computer, but never to the internet. And so that was from 2018 to 2022. My focus at the time wasn't really SRA. The focus became SRA now, provoked by the Channel 4 film. And for some reason or other, I ran into that amazing, I guess it must have been the 20 to 27 victims film, Max, Unbroken.global.
Oh yeah, Max Lowen. She's been on my podcast too.
Yeah, Max Lowen. I was very impressed by her testimony. And she ended up interviewing me too. And Penny Zublik also, she got me to tears. Then I was still more traumatized than I am now talking to you. So I can report progress.
Yay. Yeah.
So yes, there is more awareness. I think that COVID was the biggest trigger for waking up, and those that then begin to question the system will stumble into SRA. I don't know how quickly, but certainly questioning the mainstream media as a first step, and then as a next step, tumble into this SRA. And I think that's because of this pre-sexualization of children agenda as well, besides the LBTG kind of mess.
Yes, I agree that a lot of people now are asking questions. I mean, like, hey, wait a minute. Like, this is a little weird that we're involving kids in these conversations. What's up with that? And yeah, it just takes one rabbit hole that you go down, and eventually you reach the SRA rabbit hole if you dig deep enough.
Yes,
It always leads
yes,
to SRA.
that's what I think is happening, and people will stumble into it sort of sooner or later, kind of.
I completely agree. I've only been advocating myself for about 4 years, and I've seen it increase dramatically just from, that time. So I definitely have the same viewpoint that you do, that more and more people are at least just asking questions, and it might not be overnight that they find satanic ritual abuse, but they're asking questions and looking up alternative news and eventually stumbling on it somehow.
Yes. And I think it's also the case that because so many survivors have come forward and have been applauded for their courage, there is more and more credibility rather than incredulity around.
100%. And so just to sort of, I guess, tie things up as far as the Hamstead case, what do you feel, and maybe you don't know, or maybe it's not something that you've, put a lot of thought into maybe, but these children are getting a little bit older now, some time has gone by. What do you think is like, kind of best case scenario that could happen as a result of this case? And are there ways that the general public, that Americans and people that watch, how can they support?
Your guess is as good as mine, Emma. I think the biggest benefit, if you like, if you consider I call the children the whistleblower kids. So their claim to fame is that they put SRA on the map. And however God will reward them for that, I can't predict. I just can't.
Are there any websites that people can still, like, are there any websites that are still up, I should say, that people can still go to learn about this more? Or like, where would you say is like good resources if people were interested in in
I
learning.
have just been reminded of a video about 20 facts, but I think I'll put something together in an email for you.
Perfect. Okay. And then I'll just post it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then is there anything on your end, anything that you wanted to add about this case or even unrelated to the case, anything else that you're working on, any way that people can support you, and anything that we left out?
That's very nice questions. Thank you. No, I mean, at this point, I'm very glad we talked. I'm very glad about my level of non-emotionality, that I was touched by the way you described me, i.e., your appreciation. I was not touched or re-traumatized by my own trauma, which is great. Kudos to Sandra and her therapy working, I would say. I people would do me a favor if they start Googling for SRA
Amen to
and
that.
find out that and how it is and has been the mechanism of the elite for donkey's years. And stopworldcontrol.com is one of the best sites with one of the best documentaries supporting the various aspects that fall under world control and crimes against humanity. That's what I found more important than my own work. I will let you know when it's going to be worth talking about. The glorious thing is that it keeps being fascinating for me.
That's the most important part. You're growing, you're not just looking at the same things every day. You're constantly like, what more can I do? What more can I do to contribute? What more can I learn? What puzzle pieces can I put together? And I really love that about you. I think if more people followed your lead, we'd live in a better world, or at least we'd get to a better world quicker. So the more people that are exposed to you, Sabine, just like me, like I said, I remember when I saw that 6-minute video of you, my jaw was on the ground. I was like, she is so brave. Like, I can't believe she had the courage to do that. But then the more that I learned, I'm like, I would have the courage to do that now too. Like, why isn't everybody doing this and like speaking that passionately about it? When you learn what's being done, like you can't not look away and like not want to do something and speak out, especially knowing that these kids don't have a voice. And your voice was so powerful. You gave them the most powerful voice. And I'm so sorry for everything that you've suffered through, but also know that these kids put SRA on the map because you helped get their voice out. That's part of your legacy too, that you helped them bring that on the map. You helped people in America experience, the videos and this information in totally different countries. You really helped push that to circulate around the world. And you did it. You did it mostly single-handedly. You didn't have tons of people advocating on your side. Maybe behind the scenes you had some support. I know Ella spoke up a little bit, and her story I've also heard from her own words, but you were the one out there being their voice. And on behalf of that, you were the voice of every other child who's going through that right now. Your voice spoke on behalf of every single enslaved child, and you brought this awareness to people. And on behalf of everybody listening and everybody around the world, I can't thank you enough for all your advocacy work, and I'm so sorry it's came with a cost, but just know how important it is what you've done, and that this has brought this movement forward so much more than what it was. And I'm crying now. It's brought it forth so much more than what it was because you cared.
Thank you. You care too. I can see and feel. Thank you.
You're welcome. And like I said, you were such a big inspiration for me. I was like, I can speak out on this podcast if Sabine can do it, in front of all
Good
these
for
crazy
you. Good for you.
satanic people. Like I can do it too. So you're helping motivate people too that are advocates. Like it's so good to see an advocate out there that doesn't like you didn't have anything to gain, and you still went out
No,
and we're
no.
advocating, and we need more people to do that. If everybody did that, there'd be none of these people would stand a chance, if all of us were getting up and just angry. So thank you for always setting that example. You're so brave and courageous, and like it's so wonderful to finally get to meet you and have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very, very much indeed, Emma.
You held your emotions together and now I can't. That's kind of funny. Well, is there any do you have any links or anywhere that people can reach you or keep in touch with you right now or not yet?
I'll put something together for you in an email. No, just sort of not off the top of my head.
Okay, perfect. So you guys listening, I will have that information in the show notes and or any links that she sends that you guys can go dig into to learn a little bit more about all of this. No matter what platform you're on, Spotify, iTunes, BitChute, YouTube, just go in the show notes. The links, they literally turn into hyperlinks when I put it in. So all you have to do is just go down and click. So whatever's down there, go click, go support Sabine if she sends me some stuff to support research, if there's some articles I post down there. I'll have all my social media links down there below you guys. This really is an important case. The Hamstead case really is a barometer for where SRA stands in the world and how it's being treated legally, spiritually even, and just in general, how the public is accepting it. So watching this case and paying attention to it can sort of gauge in a way how the world is accepting it and how fast. And the advancements on it will be really important, I think, in the upcoming years as these children keep getting older, and we do need to be their voice. This case has a lot of attention it's gotten over the years, so it's an awesome case to go share with people. It's not just some, random person going out and saying stuff. Like this case has been documented. It's written up in a lot of articles. It might be called a hoax in some articles, but it just shows that, this case has made it mainstream when not many cases ever get heard. So it's a really important case that we should all be following and supporting. We should be following Sabine for whistleblowing this case and supporting her and lifting her up and adding more letters to that giant bag of letters that she had of appreciation. You deserve a million more of those, Sabine. So I encourage everybody to please go support her. Connect with me on all platforms too, if you can, you guys. I never know if one platform will delete me or what will happen. So just try to keep in touch as many ways as you guys can. God bless you all. Thank you so much for tuning in and supporting, and we will see you next time.